Hey everyone, it's that time of the week again. It's the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. I'm Anthony Cosenza and I'm joined by John Sheeran. And for the first time in like 2 months, John, we get to talk about a Bengals win. And even with that, there are some concerns, but we'll get to that in just a second. John, how are you, buddy?
I'm doing well, and I'm also happy to announce that this podcast is officially anti-UCLA for the night. The Bearcats basketball takes on UCLA basketball, and I don't know if you dive into USC basketball and what that rivalry is like, but UCLA sucks, at least for the next 2 hours when they play in about half an hour. So if you guys can keep me updated with the score, I know some of you are Bearcats fans, that'd be great.
Fair enough. I'm not a UCLA guy myself, so I'll root for the Bearcats with you on that one.
There you go.
Yeah, I'm not a big hoops guy, but college basketball is fun, and especially more in the spring months, it's fun. But
this is the preseason.
Yeah, right, yeah, exactly. But anytime the Bruins lose, I'm a fan of that. Well, like I said, John, I mean it's been quite some time since the Cincinnati Bengals won a football game, and to be honest, I'm kind of taken aback. I'm like, I don't know where to begin with this one because it's kind of a new thing, and like I said at the opening of the show, it's kind of like it's kind of a bittersweet thing, right? I mean, it's been so long since they won, and they won pretty handily with a lot of guys out of the lineup, but it's also, even though they had some playoff hopes that were alive, it's also kind of like, well, a lot of people would like to see them tank. So your thoughts on the win? Obviously, a nice milestone. Tyler Boyd got 1,000 yards on the season. Joe Mixon's 5 yards away there. So there's kind of a lot to digest in terms of positives. But overall impressions of the Bengals win on Sunday against the Raiders.
So it was a long time since they won, and it was a long time since they played a team that was considerably worse than them. And I guess the last time that happened was when they were playing the reeling Bucks, when they had Jameis Winston throw 4 interceptions in that first half. So since then, they played like the Saints, they played Lamar Jackson's Ravens, they played Baker Mayfield's Browns, they even played the Broncos, who, at the very least have looked competent. So, their strength of schedule over the past, however many weeks without AJ Green and Andy Dalton for the most part hasn't favored them, specifically because they're just playing so bad and they've been dealing with so many injuries. So you take a 3-win Oakland team who's obviously bad in most ways, and a quarterback in Derek Carr that can't take advantage of playing a bad Bengals defense and still not outperform a quarterback like Jeff Driscoll and put up more points on the board than an offense led under Driscoll. It's just like, yeah, you want to see the Bengals. Winning at this point for the Bengals season doesn't really do that much except for pride and however much that's worth. But even if like the Bengals wanted to tank, I don't know if like they could out tank the Raiders at this point because they're just dreadful. And I know a lot of fans were upset that they want to see a tank, and they would be better off seeing the Bengals lose because it would leave less to chance in terms of future progression. But again, this is the Raiders, guys. Like even if the Bengals wanted to lose, I'm not sure they could have, because that's just literally how bad the Raiders are. And most importantly, the Bengals aren't going to play a team that bad for the rest of the season. So I don't even think it matters at this point. Even if they wanted to tank, I think we're going to see results similar to if they were trying to plan that.
Right. And unfortunately, I mentioned Boyd. He got hurt in the game, so it sounds like he's got a sprained knee ligament, and he may not play the rest of the season. So there's another issue, another injury piling up for the Bengals. I mentioned Joe Mixon. He ran well. The week prior, Joe Mixon gets 100 yards, and it's behind the line with Christian Westerman in the lineup. And I think a lot of people largely credited him for a lot of the play there. And now this week, back-to-back 100-yard games, ran really well again. No Westerman in the lineup. So are we kind of overblowing the Westerman effect, or is that just, hey, Joe Mixon is that good that he can make some plays behind a lot of guys on the line?
Well, it's fair because we all love Westerman. We all think that he's getting like the raw end of a deal right now, and it's completely fair to assume that we're just overrating Westerman. But at the same time, the Bengals don't have a bad left guard, because even with Westerman out, that leaves Clint Bowling playing his natural position, playing up against a Raiders defensive line that's considerably worse than the Chargers defensive line, at least. And so, when you put those two together, it kind of nets the same end result, which would happen to be 127 yards on 4.8 yards per carry. But with Clint Bowling back at left guard, Cordy Glenn back at left tackle, just the overall cohesion with those two guys works a lot better than having Bowling at a position that he doesn't play well or normally at that point, and even a guy like Westerman, who is talented as he is. And also, I don't think a lot of us are big fans of Alex Redmond in his play, but even he can make some good, decent looking blocks there. And when you have Redmond, kind of toying with defensive tackles every now and then in the ground game, Clint Bowling doing his usual thing, that kind of masks, some of Billy Price's issues at the same time. So offensive line played well, but again, the level of competition was just not at the same spectrum as playing the Browns at this point, or playing the Chargers, or even the Ravens a few weeks back. So a lot of those similar things saw a lot more positive success, even with a guy as talented as Westerman out of the lineup, and that I think speaks to their need at guard may not be as big as we want to make it seem, but just because for some unknown reason Westerman just can't get on the field.
Yep. That kind of brings me to my next point about this win, and I talked a little bit about it in a post that I put up on Cincy Jungle recently, and that was kind of about the talent on the roster, right? And what this Raiders game showed was some great play by some of their most valued veterans: Carlos Dunlap, fumble recovery; Geno Atkins, 3 sacks. The veterans, Tyler Boyd, he's not a long-time veteran, but he's a guy who has really stepped up this year. So guys who have been here a little bit making plays, but then you also have some of the younger guys and beleaguered guys making some plays. Sam Hubbard, not a beleaguered guy, but a guy who is a rookie, 2 sacks, forced fumble, that sort of thing. Other young guys, and that's what this double-edged sword of a season that has kind of gone out of control. That's kind of what happens here at the end of the season. These young guys get playing time. So I guess where I'm going is, are you encouraged with the mix of some of the older guys that will be back in 2019, along with some of these young guys that have flashed this year and flashed on Sunday?
Well, that relationship that you were leading to, and that you mentioned it, it's like now that the Bengals just aren't competitive anymore in December. It's kind of like a yearly thing where we want these guys to play, early on the season when they're struggling at some, positions that we've seen them struggle in the past. And then those young guys can't get on the field until at this point in the season when they're already out of the race. And then we see those young guys play well because we knew they were good players, but for some reason the coaching staff doesn't put them out there for at least as long as they should have. And now you're seeing, better play at some positions than before because, veterans are either injured or the young guys are getting those chances to play because these games, again, don't really matter for the sake of playoffs or anything like that. So it's kind of almost like a yearly thing at this point. Last season we saw, at that time, an unknown in Alex Redmond and Christian Westerman, trade off snaps at left guard, and run blocking there, just for the overall offensive line looked a lot better in that sense. Tyler Boyd, I think, stepped up last season in the last 2 or 3 games after not playing at all for most of his sophomore season, and he popped off. And so, we might see, guys like a Josh Malone, maybe if he finally plays with all the injuries that, receiver that they're going through right now. A lot of us hope for Malik Jefferson, but he's on injured reserve, so we're just got to wait for 2019 to see him. But yeah, there'll definitely be some other names, I think, that are just going to play a little bit more as the season winds down to irrelevance and up against good competition in the Browns and the Steelers. So it's almost like a yearly tradition now, unless the Bengals somehow get good. And, but in terms of me being confident about that mix, like until they just start playing these guys earlier in the season, that I think the process of getting them on the field needs to improve, and that would instill more confidence in me in the relationship between the young guys and the veterans. But until they finally get a good, healthy mix of both of them consistently throughout the season, I think that's when the confidence can kind of be more instilled.
Right. And like I said, there's just, it's kind of weird to me. And this is what I expressed in that post, is just, there are position groups that are talented, that have some talent in both at the veteran end of the spectrum and the young guy end of the spectrum. But there are some groups that are just completely devoid of talent. It seems, whether they're injured or not, or I mean, in the case of one position group, the linebackers, once the starters are gone, it's oh boy, you know. So, and you know, I mean, not every team is going to have absolute killer depth at every position group. That's just not, it's not a realistic expectation. But, you know, I mean, you'd like to think that some of these groups would be a little bit more strong than what we've witnessed throughout this bad stretch of games and this injury bug that's hit this team. So regardless, they took care of a lesser opponent. And I mean, really, if I haven't watched a lot of Raiders football this year, but that's not a very good team.
You wouldn't want to.
No,
they're just bad.
Yeah, it's just not a very good football team. But you know, like I said, there were some signs of encouragement. I mentioned Sam Hubbard, you know, on a couple of those plays. He beat Colton Miller, who's a first-round pick this year of the Raiders, and one that was linked to the Bengals quite a bit. So, I mean, you see him beat Miller, and so that in itself is discouraging for Oakland, but encouraging for the Bengals for sure. And obviously, with a win and the Bengals getting to 6-8. They were briefly alive for the playoffs. What transpired later on Sunday basically eliminated them. Any small chance they had to make the postseason, they were eliminated with the Steelers beating the Patriots, which not a lot of people thought that would happen. But regardless, the Bengals are out of the playoff hunt, which we kind of figured they were, but it's been a weak year in the AFC and the AFC North. So they were alive, even though their record really didn't predicate them being alive at this point in the season. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. I'm Anthony Cosenza. He's John Sheeran, talking about the Bengals win over the Raiders and what it means both in the present and in the future. You can get this show on iTunes, on Stitcher, on Google Play. You can get them on those apps. You can get it on Art19. We are on YouTube, and all of our stuff is on cincyjungle.com, as well as some of our writings from both John Sheeran and I. So check out what Cincy Jungle is offering there. And we are proud to be a part of the SB Nation family of podcasts. We're pretty stoked on that. That was, in case you're a new listener, that is something that was a recent development right before this regular season occurred. So I'm pretty excited about that and excited about what that means going forward for the show. Speaking about going forward, John, this Raiders win gets the Bengals to 6-8, and it's oh so close to that magical Marvin number of 8-8. And I think what's on a lot of fans' minds, and I know we already got one listener question. Usually we save these till the end of the program. And side note, if you do have some of those, we will be trying to take some of those at the end of the program if we can. But you can hit us up on Twitter at BengalsOBI. You can leave your comments in the comment thread at cincyjungle.com or in the chat at YouTube. And then we have our text and call line open, 949-542-6241, if you want to hit us up there. But I wanted to get to this question early because it relates to a topic we wanted to talk about, and it was on Twitter from Carlos Andre at CarlosAndre31. Hey guys, do you think this win saved Marvin's job? I thought that with a 5-11 record, the odds were high, as high that they could get. I'm assuming meaning getting rid of him. I still have hope with 6-10. That's a funny statement, but I still have hope with 6-10. But if they win one more game, we're stuck with him again. Any thoughts? Greetings from Brazil. Love the show. Hude. Thanks, Carlos. Appreciate the question. As I said, we were going to talk about this as kind of a topic anyway, so the question relates well. I think that's both. I mean, it's a concern. It's an expectation. To me, as I sit here today, I don't know that this one means as much as the next two games in terms of a win. I think we know how the Brown family feels about the Cleveland Browns, and obviously a win against the Steelers and one that could potentially knock them out of the playoffs, that could play in Lewis's favor. So your thoughts about the win this week and what it means going forward for Marvin Lewis's job security. And then let's start there. If
Lewis saved his job with the win against the Raiders. His job wasn't in jeopardy to begin with. And, my whole standpoint with it is that I don't think that Mike and that team operates strictly on a couple wins and losses to sway their decision-making. Because to Carlos's question, he said, if this win eventually leads them to becoming 7-9, so they go, 1-1 and either with the win against the Browns and the winning against the Steelers. Still a losing record, still the same record that they had last year when they brought Marvin back on a 2-year contract. Like, if the Raiders win is like the main reason why they got to 7-9, and then that's the number that brings Marvin back, he wasn't. You can't tell me with a straight face that his job was at risk in the first place, and that would just only confirm that winning and losing doesn't, determine Marvin Lewis's job security. So I feel like they have a decision right now in mind about what to do with him, and ultimately a lot of that decision is going to be laid upon Marvin. And if they happen to somehow win one of these last 2 games, and if that's enough to instill some type of surge and a desire to come back yet again and try for a 4th consecutive losing season, then that's fine. But I don't think that the organization itself is going to look at a win against a team that's worse than the Bengals at home in front of 30,000 somewhat fans in the stadium and say, yeah, this is the thing that's going to make things okay. It's the first win since October. I don't buy that, to be honest.
Yeah, and it's tough because I think you and I spoke last week before the show about my just a side deal. My nephew met a lot of players the evening before the Chargers game, and he ended up meeting Marvin Lewis, and Marvin Lewis was so cordial and such a nice guy to him. And he actually approached my nephew, who's like 11 years old, and it's that kind of stuff where you go, oh man, we're sitting here just begging for the guy to not be employed anymore. You know what I mean? It's really sad. And I've met him, I've talked to him, and he is a really, really nice man. And he's done a lot of good things for the Bengals, but a time for a change is a time for change. And even successful organizations do that. The thing that I wonder about, like you said, John, is I don't know that his job would have been in jeopardy if with a win over the Raiders. That doesn't really mean much in the grand scheme of things. And when you look at what Mike Brown said last year, when it came time to decide whether or not to bring Lewis back or re-sign him, it was that the Bengals basically knocked off 2 potential playoff teams. And that's what helped him decide that the team was playing well for him at the end of the year, that sort of thing. And that meant a lot to him in that decision process. Now we sit here and we go, well, theoretically, the Browns are still alive for the playoffs. I think the Steelers are still alive for the playoffs and the division crown. So, I mean, does that excuse play in there? And I go back also, John, to, is this something where we know about Mike Brown and he's not, I don't know if you want to call him like non-confrontational or whatever you want to label him as, and there are a lot of labels, but with Marvin, you almost wonder if he wants to take the white glove treatment with him and say, you know what, we've got this 1 year, either you stay or the opt out is that mutual parting. You know what I mean? So I don't know. Those are kind of some thoughts rattling in my head. If you want to expand on those, or your thoughts on if he comes back. I mean, like you kind of mentioned it a little bit. Is it probably going to be more of the same in 2019 if Marvin's back, or the injuries and all of that? Does that play into a potential more successful season?
So we want Marvin to essentially retire because I don't think he's ever going to get fired. If he does leave, it'll be part of his decision making as well. We want Marvin to retire because we believe that that's like the one tangible, obtainable step in progress that we as fans can hope for. Because the underlying problem, the main problem with the Bengals is not necessarily the head coach. It's more the owner and how he runs things, and obviously all those things that we have expanded upon to death. And when people talk about, the Bengals wouldn't be anywhere near where they are without Marvin Lewis, perhaps that's true. But then we get upset when people say, how are they going to do better than him based off where they were? I don't think a lot of us realize that if Marvin Lewis is gone, and let's just say for hypothetical reasons that Hugh Jackson is not the replacement, I truly wonder who is going to win over Mike Brown's heart in that scenario, because Marvin Lewis's underrated ability is to, somehow swindle power away from Mike Brown with whatever, charm or charisma or persona that he puts on for him. And I don't know of a single coach out there that can possibly do the same thing with a man, that operates and has the personality of a Mike Brown. So it honestly is curious to me, when and if Marvin Lewis, moves on, who is going to be the guy that can possibly, convince Mike Brown to do things differently, and also be a guy that Mike would even trust and would even accept into his inner circle because he's such a family man. And I think that's the reason why a lot of people think it's going to be Hugh, because he's kind of runs things similar to Marvin, has that similar personality traits, and are obviously good friends. And so Mike would trust, Marvin vetting him or whatever. But I don't know. I think that's an aspect that not a lot of people, think about when people talk about Marvin being the best thing for them, because Marvin might be the best might be the best coach with that kind of personality that can deviate the power away from Mike in that sense.
Okay, so, and I agree with you. To be honest, I think it was. I think it was actually the 2011 offseason when he came back. I was like, no. After 2010, I was like, no. Right. And then when they re-signed him, I changed my tune a little bit and saying, look, this is the only guy, it seems, that is grabbing Mike Brown's ear. Mm-hmm. So that's why I was like, okay, I'm in for another turn with Lewis. And now it's turned into this after, obviously 2011 through 2015, that was enjoyable. But since it still can't win the big games. Players don't show up in the big games. We know the narratives. So I've got just a couple more questions I want to ask you on this, John. Do you think that the effort level, especially given the injuries, do you think that the effort level is potentially saving him? Near win, or at least very competitive game against the Chargers, win against the Raiders. Obviously, I thought the effort was pretty poor against some of the better teams they played where they got blown out and whatnot. The Browns, I thought the effort was pretty poor in that game early on. But, do you think now that's another thing that Mike Brown might say, well, you know what, this team, quote unquote, didn't give up on him?
Well, it all started with that collapse against the Saints. And at the time, the Saints were amounting to be as one of the very best teams in the NFL. It wasn't even close on the field. Once that started happening and they realized just how outclassed they were compared to the elite in the NFL, things started to downturn. And then when you continue to play teams that are just more talented than you, I feel like effort at the start is already at a low because you already don't have a lot of confidence that you can beat teams of this quality. And then you face the Raiders and they start firing out of the gate because they're just even at this point, they're the better team than the Raiders. People are like, oh, they're playing for Marv. They're just playing a team that they're just clearly more talented than. They're not going to have that situation against the Browns, and they're not going to have that situation against the Steelers. Sure, because it is the home finale, and there is speculation that this could be Marvin's last home game. Maybe they played a little bit more extra for that, but I do think that there is something to be said about playing a team that even they know, losing 5 straight, they're just better than. They're just more talented. The roster is better, and they probably don't respect John Gruden and what he's done to start there in the first place. So I think a lot of those factors factor in more than just overall effort playing for Marvin for one last time.
This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. He's John Sheeran. I'm Anthony Cosenza. We're talking about the situation with Marvin Lewis and what it means, what this win means going forward for his future with the club. John, both you and Matt Minich at CincyJungle.com wrote recent articles about tanking. Mm-hmm. Matt Minich's stance was tanking is not going to solve the Bengals' problems is the title of that. And I glanced at that one a little bit. Basically, it goes beyond – the issues go beyond needing a high draft pick type of thing. It's organizational stuff. It's, things with Lewis, that sort of thing. And then you wrote one 2 days ago that was titled "The Bengals Haven't Failed at Tanking Yet." So I'm going to give mine as well, but I mean, give us your stance at this point on the Bengals tanking their season, because I think a lot of people are like, dude, just lose out, get that high pick and do what you can with it. Whereas other people aren't so sold on that idea.
And even I totally understand, the points that Matt expanded upon in that piece. When they were, I don't even know what the record was, but it was about a month ago. I wrote about wanting the Bengals to continue winning because winning and losing doesn't matter when they're making long-term decision making, specifically with Marvin or whatever. And that was at the point where they were still kind of in the playoff race, and there was still a decent possibility. Since then, they didn't win, and at this point, now I'm thinking you might as well just not leave it to chance with a division win against the Browns or the Steelers. You might as well just lose out to make sure that you do see at least some form of actual tangible change at where it matters. And the only way that we would for sure see that is if they would lose. And if that doesn't happen, if they lose, then we can really confirm that winning and losing doesn't matter in terms of that kind of thing. But a lot of people were worried that a win against the Raiders would ruin them from a top 10 pick. And I ended up doing the math, and the vast majority of teams who ended up winning 6 games on the year, 75% of them pick between 8th and 10th in the draft order, or at least that's where their final alignment is. And so there's about 20% chance that they get outside of the top 10, but the odds are in favor of them finishing in the top 10. But then you think back about it and you're like, it doesn't really matter where they're going to draft or what their first round draft pick is. The overlying issue still exists on this roster. And if those issues, persist with the same guys leading the ship, then not a lot of that is going to matter. And that's where I agree with Matt as well in that standpoint.
I'm on the fence about a lot of things with it. I mean, I think overall, if you're not going to the playoffs, I think the overarching opinion is, of course, you want the highest draft pick as possible to get the highest impact player as possible. And playing into that corner with me is something I've harped on a lot on this show and on the website is, if you're not going to move up to get an impact player, you might as well get as high of a pick as possible to get the guy that you potentially want, because the Bengals never trade up, especially in the early rounds for someone significant. Instead, they wait and see who falls to them. So from that standpoint, I'd like to see them not win any more games and get the highest pick possible.
Right. And I think Matt talked about, they need to learn how to win and to kind of eradicate as much of the losing culture as it is. But I think you and me can both agree that if this team had a head coach within, 2 or 3 years in his tenure, and they were more talented than where they are now, then you would want them to finish the season strong, to get some momentum going forward for next year, because you have stability in there. But since you're trying to push guys out of the door, winning probably delays that happening than losing does.
Yeah, year 1, year 2 in a new coaching regime, if you're, at that 6-win mark, you kind of want to say, hey, let's push and see how we can, and that's, year 16, there's a different attitude. But the other thing, though, I mean, I guess I'm just a little old school, and I've coached teams and stuff. So I don't even if the season is out of control, I don't like to see a team quit. And from a fan standpoint, watching the games, I don't need to see, against 2 bitter rivals, especially coming up here, I don't need to see them get blown out by 3 touchdowns in each game. The injury excuse is there, but I'd really like to see them make a game of it. And if they lose, okay, that plays into the draft thing. They're already out of the playoff race anyway. But I would like to see them at least put up a fight against these 2 teams, which is weird to say for the Browns, because that's been a team that they've largely owned, but definitely the case for the Pittsburgh Steelers. So that's I see pros and cons to each, and some, but then sometimes high effort level will get you that win and knock you down, knock you down the draft order. So there's a double-edged sword there. But I mean, I guess as weird as it sounds at this point, ideally I would like to see, Joe Mixon get his 1,000 yards and end up having a really good statistical season. Tyler Boyd's already got his 1,000 yards. I'd like to see some of these young guys play and improve. I'd like to see the effort level be high, and if they lose, that's fine with me, I guess, because then they would get the higher draft positioning. But I just don't like losing against. I don't like the Bengals losing against those teams. It's it's not fun. But to end this discussion, John, quickly, Marvin Lewis keeps his job if they finish 6-8, or I'm sorry, they finish 6-10, 7-9, 8-8. What category or categories do you see him keeping his job in 2019 with those records?
I would say 8-8. I guess you can throw it in as likely because there's precedent for last year and how they ended. 7-9. I feel like a win against the Browns and a loss against the Steelers probably isn't enough if we're still in this vacuum of these last two games meaning something and mattering. 6-10, I think. I think that at that point, like, Marvin doesn't have a lot of energy and any motivation to continue. So I would say 7-9 with that asterisk, with that win being against the Steelers, maybe more so than it being against the Browns. 8-8, door is definitely wide open, I would say.
Yeah, I think 8-8 he saves himself. 7-9 is dependent. I'm a little more confident in Lewis staying at 7-9 maybe than you are because of who they play and the fact that both of those teams are in the playoff hunt. The Brown family absolutely still hates the Cleveland Browns. And then obviously the Steelers, just bitter rival. And I think if Lewis can get a win with this injury-riddled team, if he can get a win against one of those teams, I think he might stay at 7-9. And theoretically, it's not a digression from last year, right? I mean, record-wise. So I think that they would look at that and say, then that's when you start hearing the excuse things. But I think if they lose both games, I don't think he comes back. I think 6-10.
He still could come back. Like, I don't even want to have any confidence in that statement,
Yeah, I guess. Yeah. 6-10, and yeah. Oh man. I'm looking through the YouTube chat. There's a lot of different comments and questions, or a couple of questions we'll get to later, but a lot of different comments here. And Michael Meyer says, no matter where we pick, the team cannot let Mike Brown make the first round pick. Well, he's the owner, so I don't know how little of say he would have in that. Obviously, he's been at the head of a lot of different first round disasters with this team, but we'll let bygones be bygones, I guess. We're gonna get to some calls in just a little bit. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. He's John Sheeran. I'm Anthony Cosenza. You can get this show on iTunes, on Stitcher, on Google Play. You can get it on cincyjungle.com. We're also on YouTube and Art19. So get the program how you can, and give us your thoughts on Marvin Lewis and what you think is going to transpire with his job coming up here. We did just, unfortunately, we got a call back in just a little bit. We're in the middle of a segment here, so we couldn't get to your call, but call back in just a little bit here. We'll try and get to you, and keep trying to reach us. Call or text 949-542-6241. We'll try to get you on the air when and how we can. Otherwise, we'll get your questions from the live YouTube chat or the live comment section in cincyjungle.com or on Twitter at BengalsOBI. You can get us. You can get to us there, and we'll try and get your questions there. John, the Pro Bowl rosters were announced this week, and yes, the Pro Bowl, and Geno Atkins is nominated as a starter. I think that's kind of rightfully so, and I want to talk about him for just a second. But before we do, just to run down the Bengals nominees, they basically had Atkins was the starter, and a lot of different alternates. And this day and age, with what the Pro Bowl is and isn't, a lot of players opt out, so we could see more than just Atkins potentially play in the game, which is a good and bad thing. But Atkins he's got a seventh Pro Bowl nomination, which puts him basically, I think, at second all time in Pro Bowl nominations in team history, behind Anthony Munoz. But Clayton Fejedelem was a first alternate for a special teams player. Alex Erickson was a third alternate as a returner, which I thought was kind of low for him. I thought he's had a really good year as a return man. Joe Mixon was a third alternate at running back. And oddly enough, A.J. Green, who's missed like half the season already, was voted a fourth alternate at wide receiver. He was having an amazing season before he got hurt. And obviously that kind of greatly affected the Bengals' chances going forward. But your thoughts on the Pro Bowl, John? Is it just basically nothing more than a popularity contest and basically a joke at this point?
So I definitely have some takes here. First of all, imagine like yeah, I'm a Pro Bowler, and like your friend's like, dude, you were just a third alternate as a kick returner. Just like calm down. So first of all, there's that, and I think that like opens the giant can of worms to the tremendous salt fest that is fan voting for the Pro Bowl. For me, in my perspective, yes, like fans probably have a little bit too much influence because they just look at box scores. They just look at, who does well on their fantasy teams. They probably look at Madden ratings as well. So their overall general knowledge is not to the point where we should be, having these guys collect accolades that they probably shouldn't deserve. With that being said, when you just look at the general history of who has gotten a lot of Pro Bowl nominations, for the most part, they're pretty decent players. And there's a handful of, every year of players that probably shouldn't have gotten in. But for the most part, when just looking at, guys who have like lead the league in all time in Pro Bowls, like nominations, most of them pretty much deserve it. So I don't think that the process is as flawed as a lot of people think. But it's like the penultimate, I don't want to actually go. I just want to get the invite. And, fan bases and fans are like, yeah, my team's, defensive tackle and quarterback definitely should have been voted in. But at the same time, those people don't watch the game because the game is not high quality. And they don't even want their players playing in the game because, you could end up like Tyler Eifert and, have an injury that lasts all year because you injured it in the Pro Bowl. So it's a lot of fans being salty, which I love because I love people getting salty over Twitter. And it's about a lot of meaningless stuff. And I generally think that people just don't respect Pro Bowl nominations as much as All-Pro. But every single year we have the same discussion and we have the same people getting fake mad about players who play either for winning teams or popular teams getting the Pro Bowl nomination, and then half of them end up not playing. So it's honestly one of my favorite pointless beefs with random people on Twitter and overrated players. It's honestly the perfect storm of just me grabbing some popcorn and going onto Twitter. So I love it, but I can understand why people hate it.
Yeah, and it really does, to me, if you're a fan of a team and that team has a not great season, it really just puts an exclamation point on it because a lot of those people get dogged out of rifle positions. I mean, in the real bad pre-Marvin days of the Bengals, there were guys that deserved Willie Anderson, Corey Dillon. There were guys that deserved all kinds of accolades that did not receive them simply because they were a very bad team. And I mean, at the time, also, it was a offensive line / running back heavy league during that time. So I mean, there were a lot of talented players at those spots. But I mean, the point remains that bad teams don't always get the guys in the game or in the Pro Bowl that they should. Like Joe Mixon currently leads the AFC in rushing yardage, and he's the fourth alternate in the game. So, or third alternate or whatever. But like you said, though, even though it's like such a mess because the league has tried to intervene to make it more watchable and to make it more entertaining. They've tried to intervene and say, oh, if you're basically caught not tackling or something, they've tried to do that. They've tried to do, we're not just going to do AFC versus NFC. We're going to mix it up. Or they've tried to do all kinds of things. And I mean, at this point, and to me, I think a lot of times what the players loved about it, The Pro Bowl was after the Super Bowl. It used to be, and it was in Hawaii. So a lot of those guys were like, dude, I kicked ass this year, and I'm getting a free vacation to Hawaii to bring my family, right?
Right.
So it was like that made it felt like it was like this is a deserved award. Now, I mean, it's like, what if you're a Jacksonville Jaguar and the game's in Orlando, right? Or what if you're, you know what I mean? What if you're a Miami Dolphin or Tampa Bay Buccaneer and the game's in Orlando? I mean, it's just kind of like, well, what are we doing? To me, they've tried to alter it, and you got to give them credit. They've tried to get creative, but at the same time, it's like, is it better off to do it the old way where it actually seems like a true reward and you actually get, some of the Super Bowl players or whatever to play in the game by keeping it in Hawaii, keeping it after the Super Bowl, all that stuff? Or do you kind of just, again, this discussion, do you do away with it and have maybe like an all-pro team that the press designates, kind of like what they do now, and then maybe you have some other ancillary teams or nominations that you call a Pro Bowl? I don't know, and I don't really have a good answer. That's why this game is still around. But
yeah,
I actually, as a kid, used to look forward to it, even though not a lot of Bengals played in it. But now it's like, I mean, and then you got a guy like Alvin Kamara who just absolutely destroyed the league this year, and he doesn't even, it's like, what's going on?
Yeah, because it's a lot of different dynamics here. If you want to increase the quality of voting, then presumably you would still want there to be a game. But I don't think your thoughts about your favorite team's players playing in the game that doesn't matter would change in that mind. And then you're thinking, because a lot of people would just like it to be like a skills competition and just get rid of the game. And at that point, I wouldn't trust fans to vote for the right players because they would just vote for the guys who would be better at dodgeball, would probably like eat the most like wings in like one sitting in like hot sauce. The guys who could like swim with like sharks the fastest, all this, like they would just vote for the guys who would just do well in the skills competition. I'd be down for that. It wouldn't increase the quality of the vote. It would probably diminish the quality of being a Pro Bowler even more. But it's just like a give and take system. Like you just got to choose which one you kind of want to go with, and getting rid of the fan vote in general would just decrease overall fan involvement even more than it already is. So I don't think they're even going to do that. I just think that people just have to decide which side they are on, and I'll just watch this whole chaos go down from my computer while this is all happening.
Yeah, Michael Myers again in the chat room says, I don't know, I went to a Pro Bowl in Hawaii back in '95 and the stadium was totally empty. '95, that must have been the Jeff Blake, Carl Pickens. They must have played in that game. If it was in Hawaii and I don't know. I'd be interested in kind of going to that because I like Hawaii, but I don't know. He also said would it be more interesting if the players voted instead of fans, like the NFL Network's top.
Yeah, people get pissed about that list too. Like no one's ever going to be happy.
Yeah. Totally true. And but that's where you kind of feel for the league a little bit. They want to have an all-star game, but the nature of the sport in terms of the physicality of it, I mean, it just makes it difficult to add another game, especially one that's, I mean, it's not totally meaningless because these guys win money and stuff playing in it. But, I mean, overall, like you said, Tyler Eifert ended up really screwing himself, getting a pretty bad injury in that game. So, a lot of people probably look at it and say it's not worth it. Regardless, Geno Atkins is in the Pro Bowl. And the Bengals have some other alternates. We're going to get to some listener questions here in just a second. We do have a caller on the line, and we're going to get to.
Oh, man, UC started. I'll check the score.
This is the Orange and Black Insider. Who's this?
Hey, it's John from Kentucky.
John, what's going on, sir?
Great podcast. I guess I'll just start it off here quickly. Anthony, I'm looking back over the season. Remember, we started 4-1, and remember the turnovers we were getting. You remember against Indianapolis?
Yep.
And Miami?
Yep.
And even Tampa Bay when we didn't play so great. What happened? I actually like Terrell Austin's philosophy of What happened?
Well, I think that's a great question and a great point. I think there are a number of different issues that one could point at in terms of what occurred. I think a very inconsistent pass rush contributed. I think Terrell Austin, by most accounts, said that most accounts after he got fired, people said that he tried to throw too much too soon at a group that kind of had their heads spinning a little bit. John Sheeran, what are some of your thoughts to John from Kentucky's question here?
I don't think it's unreasonable to say that turnovers and committing a lot and forcing a lot of them are necessarily sustainable. And people will like point to that one Charles Tillman season for the Bears where he had like forced 8 fumbles or whatever, and the Bears defense just ran train on the entire NFL. And that obviously didn't continue over to the next year. And I think just over a season, just a team that forces a lot of turnovers is more indicative of how talented that defense is. And then once injuries started with Carl Lawson and, in the secondary as well with Darqueze Dennard, some weaknesses started getting exposed. And then you have the entire secondary, unit just completely in shambles just from a talent perspective. So I don't think they have the talent to consistently produce that many turnovers. And obviously the level of competition started to get a lot better because, they faced a Colts team that was still, finding its feet. They faced Jameis Winston, who was just turnover prone in general. And I think the other game was like Brian Tannehill, which, those were 2 fluky turnovers to begin with. So I think sustainability is the main issue. And then obviously the lack of talent compared to other top defenses kind of led to that downfall, I guess.
Yeah. And to both Johns, I think this team has proven to be feast or famine on a lot of different fronts. And I think that unfortunately, instead of the feast one week, famine the other week, feast where it's like almost every other week and it's a coin flip, the feast was maybe only a quarter of the time and the famine was 3/4 of the time. And I think that's indicative of the record. The thing, John from Kentucky, I want to say to you and ask you about before we get you off the air. You've been a Bengals fan for a long time, so I'm sure you can kind of relate. The thing in terms of what you're talking about with turnovers and big plays by the defense, the thing that has driven me nuts, and we just got done talking about Geno Atkins. He's one of the guys, but their main guys, their big play guys, they're big time players, especially on defense. They have not shown up in those marquee matchups. They absolutely disappeared in the Chiefs game, the Steelers game, the games they needed them to step up the most, they did not step up, and I think that's been a big problem.
Yes, I agree. We've had little to no pass rush. And, of course, I'm not about to get out of here yet without bashing the head coach. I mean, during the Steelers game that you just mentioned, Anthony, when we had the ball on the Pittsburgh 40-yard line to start the second half, and Marvin Lewis punched the ball. I did, I was just so frustrated. We've seen that over the years, and it's things like that is why when Marvin Lewis does leave, I don't want him in the front office. No, because he'll be up there saying, "Well, we don't really need to move on from Andy Dalton. Let's give him a few more years." Vontez Perfect? No, he's okay. Another year or two. Dre? No, no, absolutely no. But we clearly want to move on from Marvin Lewis. Nevertheless, I'll say this, and this is surprising. Did you bother to watch the Raiders game?
I did.
Okay. Did you see how aggressive Marvin Lewis was there for a little while? Moving his team down the field?
Yeah.
Even the announcers mentioned it.
Well, yeah.
Where has this been? I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Where has this been over his career?
Well,
we want to see this every game, and not just against the worst teams in the league. No, we want to see this against Pittsburgh.
Yep.
Where has this been?
Unfortunately, John, I think again, you and I have watched a lot of Bengals games over the years, and a lot of Marvin Lewis over the years. I think it's at the point now where it's like, well, now we've got nothing to lose because basically the season was kind of out of control. They were playing a lesser opponent. They probably knew that. And he kind of loosened the grip a little bit, if you will, off the off the handles, and you know, what do you know? It paid off. They ended up going for it. They ended up getting points and winning a game. And I don't know. I mean, he's a conservative guy, and I think that's been a big problem with him. John, we've got another call coming through. Thanks for calling, sir. All right, see you, buddy. Thanks for calling. This is the Orange and Black Insider. Who's this? Terrell, what's going on, buddy?
How you doing?
Good, man. Sorry, I think you called in a couple times. Sorry we missed you there, but glad we got you in.
Oh, it's all right. It's okay. I know. Y'all been trying to talk about our Bengals, and I like to. I want to add. I like the point y'all was making about the promo and everything. That was excellent, though.
Thanks, man.
I was gonna say, really, I honestly think that Dwayne Haskins is the best quarterback in the draft. And when I was talking about making that risk, I mean, even if they do make that risk at taking the first round, I don't mind him sitting behind Darwin and seeing. But basically, I just really want them to have a decent line, though. And it's funny though because Gordy, Glenn, whatever you want to call him, whatever. And he was alright this year, but when I was at work today, somebody had the Notre Dame jersey on, whatever, and all I could think of was Quentin Nelson, who played for the Colts. So I'm like, damn, Coach. So, but anyway, yeah, I like the way I have. I think he's a good quarterback. And also, going into this year to next year, Joe Mixon is a top 5 running back in the NFL. He's better than Gordon. He's better than David Johnson. I even got him better than Camaro. Well, right now, I say I got him more career right now, but and I got Camaro right behind him. But other than that, you know, it's Gurley and Ezekiel.
Yeah.
And, I just think, and I don't want to talk about Marvin, so
Thank you.
I'm not even going. I don't got no time, man. I'm just like,
yeah.
I'm so happy about Geno. And that's like one of my favorite players because I've been watching Geno and Dunlap like from when he was in Florida and when he was with Jordan like back in the day. But I'm glad he got another Pro Bowl. I really think that Bates, I mean, you know, the guy from Leonard, the other linebacker, the coach, he got slow, whatever.
Yeah.
I think Bates was a better player this year than the guy that played for the Baltimore safety. I can't think of him right now, but yeah, he got one of the nominees. And it was somebody else in the AFC. I thought that Bates played better than him too. But you know, it is what it is. You know, fantasy says, you know, have superstar players. You know, it is what it is.
Yep. Popularity contest. Yeah, popularity contest. Thanks, Terrell. We're going to talk about some of your stuff off the air. Appreciate you calling in, my friend.
No problem. Have a good one.
All right, you too. The main one I think a lot of people are interested in. I mean, a lot of good stuff there from Terrell, but the main one I think people will want to talk about or want us to talk about is Haskins, and he has risen up quite a bit, and rightfully so, given his stats and everything that he did this year. He has risen up quite a bit, really, over the past month or so in terms of draft positioning in this year's class. Very weak quarterback class overall, and I want to get your thoughts on him, John. I'm just going to say real quick my thoughts. I've been a little hesitant about Ohio State quarterbacks in general. You know, system they run, all that kind of stuff. And you look back, you know, Troy Smith and, you know, these athletic guys that can run a bit, and they put up these astronomical numbers. They're in the Heisman race. Haskins is one of them. Who was the guy a couple years ago that stepped in for
12 gauge Cardell?
Yeah, Cardale Jones and JT Barrett and all. You know, there's all these guys that come out that have these excellent statistical college careers for Ohio State. The teams are very successful. They go to bowl games. They win national championships. But they get to the NFL, they get to the pros, and either they're undersized, they're overwhelmed by what NFL offenses are asking of them. And I don't know if Haskins is of that mold. I don't know if he has a higher ceiling than some of those guys, but there's been kind of a long track record of a lot of Ohio State quarterbacks that have come in and just kind of been blah.
Man, it's only December, and we're talking about. I wanted to avoid Haskins for like until at least January, but I guess we're just going to do it now.
Well,
no, like let's just do it. You have hesitation about Ohio State quarterbacks, and for me, it's kind of similar to Ohio State interior offensive line. And a good portion of my family is Ohio State graduates, and I actually saw them just over the weekend. And we were talking about Billy Price being better moving to guard, and how ever since Corey Linsley dominated at Ohio State at the center position, and then got drafted and has developed into one of the better centers in the league, they've just been plugging and playing guards into center, and just kind of going off of the success that Linsley had. Pat Elflein was like the Remington Award winner. Billy Price became the Remington Award winner. And then this year, Mike Jordan was the Remington Award winner. For all three of them were the best centers in the league, in the nation. And all my family who are Ohio State fans, like, Mike Jordan's not good. He's not a good center, but because of the reputation that was set upon that position in recent years past, it kind of creates this false perception that guys, just because they're wearing the scarlet and gray and they're playing center, they must be good at football. So with that, I would always say, in terms of scouting guys, you got to look at the traits. You got to look at what they actually do more so than what jersey that they wear. And a lot of people got in trouble with that with Patrick Mahomes, because people didn't trust, Big 12 air raid quarterbacks succeeding in the NFL, but they didn't look at what Mahomes did well. And a lot of them got burned because he's lighting the league on fire. So it's dangerous to look at Haskins and assume that because he's an Ohio State quarterback, he's not NFL caliber. But at the same time, there's also the other factors that you have to look at. What kind of scheme was he in? Did he get a lot of help from his playmakers? What was his average depth of target? Did he show the willingness to push the ball down the field? And did he operate well out of structure? And it's a lot of questions that obviously you and I are not well prepped to answer at this point in time, because I didn't really watch a lot of film on Haskins this year. I just watched a couple live Ohio State games. But, people will know me as, kind of an anti-Ohio State guy. I just, being in the region and not growing up a fan of the Buckeyes, naturally I'm a little bit more pessimistic on some of those guys translating to the NFL. But just because he's an Ohio State quarterback doesn't mean that he's automatically, falling in line with those other guys. But at the same time, there are legitimate questions. And I think that people who are Ohio State fans may get a little bit too high on Haskins just because he succeeded, statistically, and he still has, major issues that he needs to kind of go through. And maybe the Bengals are the team to provide him with the best spot. Maybe they aren't. But I think that's a question that we're going to, find out here in the next coming months.
Agreed. And the reason I wanted to talk about Haskins is because that also tied in a little bit to it kind of killed two birds with one stone here with another question we had from Brian Browerman talking about drafting Dalton's future replacement. Terrell didn't say that he thinks the Bengals necessarily will draft Haskins, but I mean, obviously he would be one of the nominees to potentially, as an early round guy, to potentially take the place of Dalton. So Brian, thank you for the question as well. I think just for now, we get the Dalton question a lot, so I think we're gonna hold off. But hopefully that kind of ties in and answers a little bit of your question in terms of Haskins and what we have seen from him and our concerns with him. We had another segment planned, but we're running kind of long on time, and we've got a slew of awesome questions this week. So I think we'll hold off on that segment for next week and just finish off with a couple more listener questions. We got a text. I believe it was also noted in the live YouTube chat from Vernon Lawson, and I love this question. Do you see any of the younger players making the jump like Tyler Boyd has, meaning probably with the one Tyler Boyd made this year? I don't know. Again, Boyd was a second-year guy into a third-year guy, so I don't know if you want to pigeonhole the rookies. I don't know if you want to do that. I guess if you want to say a second-year guy into his third year, I'd like to go with Carl Lawson. I think, unfortunately, he only had one sack this year. He played in 8 games, but he had numerous pressures, only had one sack, obviously had his his season cut short. And I think that if and when he's healthy next season, if you get Geno close to what he gave you this year, you still got Dunlap. If he gives you close to what he gave you this year, you give more snaps to a Lawson, to a Hubbard. I like Michael Johnson, but I think his days continue to be numbered here. I think if you give those guys snaps, I think they'll produce for you. I don't know that Lawson's going to have this 15 sack explosion year, but I could see him, if healthy the entire year, getting the proper snaps and being productive. I could see him sniffing double-digit sacks.
Okay, I like that. I think a simple answer would be Ross, but a lot of that is based off what the future of the offense is going to be in 2019. If Lazer's going to stay, I think we're pretty sure that Dalton's going to be starting, but I think there's more factors that go into it than that. I can see Ross, not exploding to the level that Boyd did, but progressing at a level that I think a lot of us would be comfortable with. But I'm going to stick in the 4th round and go Ryan Glasgow, because he was a guy that admittedly I wasn't that big of a fan on, coming out of the draft and from his rookie year. I thought he provided little upside as a pass rusher, little upside as an athlete. But just in the preseason, in the first 3 games that he played before he tore that ACL, I thought he looked like a completely different player, and to the sense where he made the necessary jumps in technique to compensate for a lack of explosion and a lack of burst off the line. He looked really good with his hands. I think he added a lot more muscle that helped him out, holding off at the point of attack and run defense. And, a big complaint for me has always been the lack of depth behind Geno Atkins and how he had to carry that position group next to mainly Domo Topeko and now Andrew Billings. But I think Glasgow is a solid piece moving forward, and I want to see how he recovers off that torn ACL, because like Geno, when he came back in 2014, he didn't look himself. And for those guys who are near 300 pounds, it takes a little bit longer than maybe some skill position players do coming off of that injury. And that's the question that we also have to ask for Lawson as well, and how he's going to come back from that injury. But I'm excited for Glasgow going forward just because of what he showed. And I think he can develop into one of the better rotational defensive tackles in the league if he comes back healthy.
Yeah, the scary thing about a lot of these guys, a lot of torn knee ligaments, a lot of sprained knee ligaments, a lot of long-term, a lot of ligament stuff this year. AJ Green, toe ligament, Andy Dalton, thumb ligament. I mean, it's a lot of like long-term recovery stuff and long-term keep them out of the lineup stuff. That's what's been so, I mean, I guess when we sit here and we want to knock on the medical staff a little bit, which is an easy target, some of these things are just kind of like, well, when it's a ligament, it's a ligament. I don't know what more you can really do about that, but is what it is. I guess we can end with this one. We've mentioned his name a couple of times, but I thought this was a good question. Michael Myers asking about the tight end spot. Curious what this team does at the tight end spot. Is Eifert worth the money with his history? Well, that's a good question itself. What will Croft ask for? Another good question. And he ends with a comment about CJ Uzomah. For some reason last week, I noticed that CJ Uzomah was targeted a bunch of times and made minimal catches. I also noticed that for some reason, this is just super random. It's just a random observation. He was like throwing his body around, trying to make catches and slamming his head against the turf. His body was just like ragdollish for some reason last week. And I don't know what that was about. I haven't really seen that too much from him, but I think Uzomah's a nice number 2. I think he's good what he has been traditionally for the Bengals. A good number 2 guy, a decent passing outlet. He's tall, he's athletic, and he can catch the ball well. I think he's a valuable guy to keep as a backup guy, but it's what you do going, with ahead. And a lot of people say, well, do you use that first-round pick on a tight end? Do you use maybe a second-round pick, especially if it's a higher, you end up getting that higher slating of a draft selection. Maybe one of those good tight ends falls to the beginning of the second round. I like Tyler Eifert. I really do. And I like what he brings to the lineup. But at this point, it's like, it's ankle. It's ankle again. It's back. It's elbow. There's a lot of, and it comes, unfortunately, that comes with the territory of the position they play because they're asked to block and catch tough catches across the middle. But I don't know. And I don't know what Eifert's going to ask for because of the injury history. So I'd like to see him back and maybe another prove-it deal, but I don't think they can rely on him.
No, they can't. But if it's all the same to him, if he wants to continue risking his body, another body part to permanent damage, if he wants to keep coming back, yeah, I'll give him a 1-year deal. Like, I honestly, like, the rate of which his body is degenerating and the rate of which he's worth on the open market, they're on like a congruent plane downwards. So they can get him for, less than what they probably did from near him now. I think his final cap hit was like 5.5. He's going to be like 29, 30 years old, coming off another season-ending injury. I can't imagine a lot of other teams, if they didn't show love to him last year on the open market, I can't imagine they're going to show any love this year. So, I'm disappointed in how much they've limited Uzomah. In my opinion, I don't think they have him running enough downfield routes and have him using his speed to kind of stretch the field in a way that I think he's capable of doing. And I think a lot of that has contributed to his lack of production. And obviously, Jeff Driscoll couldn't hit the broadside of a barn last week, and that had a lot to do with not just Uzomah's lack of production, but the entire receiving core. And he's been dealing with Andy Dalton's whatever accuracy issues he's always been dealing with, and obviously Jeff Driscoll's a backup quarterback, so the situation's not great. But he's also not that upper tier athlete that a guy like Eifert is, and I think they just trust him a lot. They depend upon him a lot too much, just going into the season, and when he goes down, they just haven't given the confidence in Croft or Uzomah to kind of take over for him, because they are different levels of athletes, and I don't think they planned well enough, when he goes out of the lineup to implement either Croft or Uzomah. As far as Croft goes, I can't imagine he's going to ask for much either. But, I'm okay with bringing back Uzomah on a modest deal. I'm okay with bringing back Eifert on another 1-year deal. Again, if it's all the same to him, if he wants to keep doing this, he's still, an upper tier talent when he is healthy. So you might as well just keep getting these 1-year deals until something sticks. But one thing I do know is that in general, it's better to buy tight ends rather than rely on young tight ends to produce. It's so rare for a rookie tight end to come in and produce like a number one. You have a guy like George Kittle who is in his second year and he's blowing up the league with Nick Mullins as a quarterback. But, typically that year 2 jump is where you see tight ends, actually produce. But relying on a rookie one, especially in the first round, it's kind of a losing battle, and not a lot of teams have success with it. So I'm okay with relying on veterans, but whether it's Eifert or maybe a draft pick, you still probably have to have that athletic guy that you can trust, winning down the field.
I've just got a couple more points here regarding Croft. He had a nice year in 2017 in terms of stepping up for Eifert, and I think he was co-leading the team in touchdown. He was maybe second in the team with touchdown receptions with like 7 or 8, and so I mean, good season there. I feel like a guy with his skill set is a little more findable than an Eifert, than an Uzomah. And I mean, I hate to say that because he's been more consistent than Uzomah. He's had more, but I just feel like his skill set, a little bit more inline blocker, kind of more of the short yardagey type of stuff. I think his skill set points to a guy that is a bit more findable in the draft or in free agency. The other thing and I don't know if you've noticed it, John, but one thing I've noticed, especially as the year has gone on and when Eifert has been out of the lineup, the Bengals have traditionally run a very effective play in the Dalton era, which is a tight end screen. And they've really done it a lot where it's just a little dump. It's almost what you see a lot of teams run with the running backs. And just because of the athleticism of some of their tight ends, particularly Eifert, it's been an effective play. They're in a hole, 2nd and long, 3rd and long, and they do this dump off play, and Eifert will move the chains on a play where he just kind of runs after the catch. And that play has been lacking, and I think that's been hurting the offense among many, many other things. But they need to get, especially if they're going to keep Dalton, and trust me, we've got a lot of questions about that tonight. If they're going to keep Dalton next year, that's probably a play in the arsenal they're going to need to bring back because that's a confidence builder. That's a drive, continuing type of play, and it just hasn't really been part of the repertoire lately. So whether that's Eifert coming back and somehow being healthy and contributing in that capacity, somebody else, and that's just one little play. I mean, we've seen Eifert make great catches and whatnot, and that's also missed. But tight end definitely needs to be addressed. Matt Langle will probably not be back, I don't think, next year. Mason Schreck is in the last year of his deal, his rookie deal, I believe. So he's got something to prove. And, the Bengals have a lot of decisions to make there, because Eifert will be a free agent. Croft will be a free agent. And I think Uzama is going to be a free agent as well, if I'm not mistaken. All those guys are. So they need to do that. They need to figure that out. So thanks for all the questions tonight, guys. Appreciate it. Appreciate you tuning in. Hopefully our answers appease you. I don't know if they will or not, but we appreciate all the questions and all of the interaction that you continue to show this program, even though it has been another subpar year by the Cincinnati Bengals. You can get this show on iTunes, on Stitcher, on Google Play. You can get it on Art19. It's all of our stuff's on YouTube as well, and you can get our stuff on cincyjungle.com. One thing I also forgot to mention, and this stuff isn't on YouTube, but it's on our audio feed and whatnot. We do a post-game. It's usually through the Cincy Jungle Facebook Live. We do a post-game analysis video, and we end up transferring that to our podcast feed. So if you are strictly a YouTube watcher of our program, definitely check that out. It's usually immediately following the game. So definitely check that out. We bring that to you every week that we can to talk about what transpired in the most recent Bengals game. John, we're going to get out of here. How you doing on Christmas shopping, man? Are you
I'm done.
Are you?
I made sure to get done yesterday.
Good for you. Yeah, I'm pretty much done too. I think I've got some other stuff a couple other things to buy for like gift exchanges and stuff, but for actual people, I think I'm
It's amazing what you can buy with that podcast money.
That's right. Just got it. We're doing the Scrooge McDuck dive into the vault of gold coins, right? No, but it's a good feeling to have, not racing around days before Christmas to do the shopping. So I'm sure you can relate. Speaking of Christmas, we haven't definitively decided as to what we will be doing this next week for the program. Obviously, it's the day after Christmas. So John, we can talk offline about availability and all of that stuff. But we'll plan to bring you something next week for sure. And obviously, even though the interest level isn't geared towards what the Bengals will do towards playoffs and all that kind of stuff, there's a lot of interest level, especially this time of year with coaching and potential change-ups, all that kind of stuff. So keep it here. Keep it at Cincy Jungle for all of those updates. We appreciate all of the support. Have a great Christmas if that's the holiday you celebrate. If you celebrate a different holiday, happy, merry, all of that stuff. Happy holidays. Have a great New Year if you do not tune in to us live before then, but shame on you if you don't. But have a good New Year nonetheless. And John, Merry Christmas, my friend. It's a week early, but and it's kind of weird to say it so early, but Merry Christmas, buddy.
Merry Christmas to you as well, man.
Yeah, thanks for everything you've done for this show, and thanks to the listeners. We'll see you next episode. This has been the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. We'll see you next time.